Hi everyone, this is Dr. GVR Seshagiri Rao, Professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, Institute of Aeronautical Engineering, Hyderabad. So up to now, we have discussed about engineering tribology subject. Different modules we have studied. So out of these, some selective topics are there related to friction or wear or lubrication. So now today in this session, I want to discuss about some selective topics. The selective topics number 1. So in this, we will discuss about friction. So main basics. So what is friction and the causes of friction? So you should know the friction definition and what are the causes. So friction is defined as the resistance offered by the surfaces that are in contact, then they move past each other. The friction is caused due to irregularities on the two surfaces in contact. So when one object moves over the other, these irregularities on the surface get entangled, so giving rise to friction. So the more the roughness, the more irregularities and more significant will be the friction. So the cause is due to the main reason is irregularities on the two surfaces in contact. Whenever two surfaces are in contact, there is a friction. So these are the causes. Definition is this is a force resistance offered by the surfaces when the two surfaces are in contact. Mention any 3 applications of friction. So friction finds application when matchsticks are ignited, and then motion of the pistons in a cylinder is an application of friction. It is possible to write on books and board as there in friction between pen and the board. How does friction produce heat? When surfaces in contact move relative to each other, the friction between the two surfaces convert kinetic energy into heat. So next one is, how is friction useful? The friction helps us in walking. For example, the friction between the shoes and the floor stops from slipping. So that actually the example is the friction between the shoes and the floor stops. So due to the friction stops us from the slipping. So otherwise it will be slip. So similarly, the friction between the car and the road prevents the car from sliding. Otherwise you can't walk. Why is friction a non-conservative force? The friction is a non-conservative force because the amount of work done by the friction depends on the path. Friction is non-conservative. So because the amount of work done by the friction, that is depends upon the path. Next, define friction. Also give the SI unit of friction. The SI unit of friction is newtons. So the friction is the force that opposes the relative motion between the two surfaces of objects in contact. So already we have discussed in first slide. The force of friction always acts in the direction opposite to the applied force only. So here, next one, lubricants and drag. So definition. The substances used to reduce friction between the two surfaces and relative motion are called lubricants. Example, oil and grease. The frictional force exerted by fluids is known as drag. That is a drag force. Next, give reasons why we sprinkle fine powder on carom board. The sprinkle fine powder on carom board to reduce friction. So the main reason is to reduce the friction. Next, explain why sliding friction is less than the static friction. So already you know the types of frictions. So one is sliding friction and another one is static friction. When an object starts sliding, the, the contact points on its surface do not get enough time to lock in the contact points on the other object. So the sliding friction is less than the static friction. The frictional force exerted by fluids is known as a drag force. So yes, the static friction is greater than the sliding friction. And one more friction is the rolling friction. So rolling friction is less than the sliding friction. So whenever the object starts sliding, the reason for the static friction less than the sliding friction is less than the static friction. The reason behind is the contact points on its surface do not get enough time to lock in the contact points on the other object. That is the reason. So here, static friction, static friction. So static friction is higher value than sliding friction, then rolling friction. So here, lesser value having this rolling friction. So next, why are the aeroplanes streamlined? Where do we find streamlined ships in nature? The aeroplanes are streamlined so that air offers minimum friction. The bodies of birds and fishes are streamlined. Next, what is the cause of friction? Again, this is asked the question, causes of friction. Many causes are there. You can write 2 or 3 in examination. Following are the main causes of the friction. So the interlocking of irregularities in the two surfaces in contact. The nature of surface, that is smooth or rough. The pressure of two surfaces. How hard the two surfaces are pressed together. Next, mass of the body of surfaces in contact. Shape of surface. Example, flat or curved. Why are aeroplanes streamlined? Where do we find streamlined shapes in nature? Already we have discussed in a previous slide. In this, aeroplanes are streamlined so that air offers minimum friction. So that's why the bodies of birds and fishes are streamlined. Next, what are the factors affecting friction on an object in a fluid? The factors affecting friction on an object in a fluid are: one is the speed of the object with respect to the fluid, shape of the object, and the nature of the fluid. Next, give 2 ways of increasing and reducing friction. So, way to increase friction are making a rough surface, that is one way. Increasing the applied force, ways to reduce friction. Second way, use of lubricants and use of ball bearings and rollers. So apply these ways to you can reduce the friction. Use of lubricants, use proper lubricants to minimize the friction, and use ball bearings and roller bearings. So making a rough surface, increasing applied force. So way to reduce the friction. So next, give examples to show that friction is both a friend and a foe. So a friction acts as a both friend and foe. So examples of friction as a friend: friction helps us to walk. So already we have discussed. Friction between the paper and the pen. So otherwise you can't write on a paper. So a nails is fixed in the wall due to friction. Friction between the mastic and the slide surface of it. help us to light a matchstick. Next, name the three properties to describe the friction force. The important three properties are the magnitude of the frictional force. I have discussed in a friction topic. This is proportional to the normal reaction force. Next, direction of a frictional force. So next one, frictional forces are not conservative. So the proportionality constant is called the coefficient of friction. It only depends on the material of the surfaces in contact. The direction of a frictional force is such that it opposes the relative motion or the tendency of relative motion between the object and the surface it is contact with. So always this frictional force always act parallel to the surface. So already you know the frictional force calculation F is equal to mu Rn. So coefficient of friction and then a normal reaction force. Does coefficient of friction depends on the area, material or speed? So whenever two surfaces are in contact such that one surface is moving on the other surface, the force developed between the two surfaces. So that is called the frictional force. So example, the frictional force is the car moving on the road. The frictional force develops between the car wheel and the road. So sometimes this frictional force is required for useful work, and some disadvantages also there. Next, why is rolling friction less than the sliding friction? Already we have discussed in previous slides. When an object moves on a rough surface or against another object, some opposing force acts on it. So known as the force of friction or just friction. The force of friction always acts in the opposite direction to the direction of motion of the object. This thing already you know. Next, why does air friction affects the car's gas mileage? So when people go around or look on the internet or shopping for a car, one of the important aspects in the gas mileage, that is how much distance would you get out of the car for a gallon of gas. Generally, cars with high gas mileage are very marketable to people on a budget. So an example of a car with a high gas mileage is Toyota Yaris, which can give an high as 40 miles per gallon. Let's define the term static friction. Frictional force between the two stationary surfaces is called static friction. The simple definition. So next is similarly kinetic friction. So kinetic friction. So whenever the force between the two rotating surface when it is in a motion is called kinetic friction. Rolling friction, when they are in rolling, instead of sliding, so rollers arranged in it. Suppose you take one box, so arrange some rollers. So on this surface, the rollers rotate, and then you can apply force. So this requires less friction than the sliding. Suppose without rollers, applied force like this. So this one is requires more friction, and rolling is less friction. So when it is stationary, not applied any force, zero force. So this is a object. So this is in this one is called as a static friction, and kinetic friction and rolling friction. Now you can write the relation. The static friction is greater higher value than the sliding and greater than the sliding and then rolling. So that's why the static friction, rolling friction, and this kinetic frictions are very important. So that's why the rolling friction is less than the sliding friction. So in examination, this they will ask questions related to this friction. And important thing is the basics of this friction definition, causes and types, and how do you calculate the frictional force, coefficient of friction, what do you mean by mu, and normal reaction force. So and then frictional theory, the calculation of theories. So very important. So in this session, we have discussed about friction and the selective topics related to this surface interaction and friction. So these are the references I have taken. So you can take any textbook and refer for more information. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.